Hi, this is Janine, and I'm going to be giving you some notes on the handout Ripe Figs. It's a short story by Kate Chopin. On the first day of class, you received a bright yellow handout, so get that out, and we'll go page by page. I'll explain the literary terms, and I suggest that you take notes on the yellow handout because you'll be using this information when you analyze the next short story, Two Kinds by Amy Tan. Okay, so now let's look at pages 12 and 13. Item number 6 on page 12 is plot. So basically you want to create a 1 or 2 sentence summary of the whole story. For a very short story like Ripe Figs, this can be pretty easy, but for a longer story, I think it can be tough. So if we think about Ripe Figs, basically this story is about a young woman who wants to go visit her cousins, but her godmother is making her wait until she's a little bit more mature. And that's pretty much the whole story from my point of view. The next item, and this one is an important one, number 7, the conflicts in the story. Because the conflicts in the story create the drama, it's important to recognize them, and very often there will be more than one conflict within a story. So if we look at this list, we have the first one listed as human versus human. And this one is clear in Ripe Figs because Babette wants to visit the cousins, but she is being restricted by her godmother. And so it's two people who are in disagreement, and that creates drama. The second one that's listed here is human versus society. So when we think of this particular conflict, usually there's some sort of law or rule or social custom that is somehow causing a problem for an individual. So I'm thinking of the movie Titanic. If you recall, in the movie Titanic, one of the main characters, Jack, falls in love with Rose. But Rose is from a rich family and Jack is very poor. So his conflict is that poor people are very often not accepted to be the spouse of a rich person. The parents and other people within their social class don't accept them. So that might be one example of human versus society. The next one, human versus technology. We see this a lot in science fiction movies. Think about the Terminator, right? The robots, people are having to fight against robots, against technology. But we can also see this in comedy movies where, let's say, an older character is not able to figure out his smartphone. That sometimes can cause a conflict. Very often those conflicts can be comedy, and that creates the comedy situation as opposed to drama. Another type of conflict is human versus nature. If we go back to the movie Titanic, in the end, when the boat was sinking, all of the characters who are in the cold water, the conflict there is that they could die because of the natural surroundings. And so that is an example of human versus nature. The next one is human versus supernatural. Supernatural usually refers to something or someone who is outside of what we consider the natural environment. So these would be stories like Twilight, where one of the characters is a vampire. This would be considered a supernatural character, or a book in which one of the characters is a ghost. That also could be considered human versus supernatural. And then the last one they list is human versus herself or human versus himself. And this is when the character is somehow having an internal conflict. Maybe a character knows what they should do but doesn't want to do the right thing. Very often, human versus himself or human versus herself. We see this in stories where a character has an addiction of some sort. And so those are the major conflicts. So when you read Two Kinds, the next story, there is more than one conflict within that story. So you want to be thinking about that and making notes as you read the story. The last item, which is on page 13, significant quotations. Here you're just being given quotes from the story, and you're asked to explain why they're important to the story. And if you notice, letter A has been done for you, but B, C, D, and E, which continue on to page 14, this you need to do for yourself, but the answers are listed later in the handout. Okay, so now we are on pages 14 and 15. At the top of 14 is the continuation of the activity related to significant quotations. And then number 9, literary elements. This section really would be important if we were going to read many short stories and use the commentary from this textbook, but we're not. So I'm going to skip over literary elements on number 9, but I do want to look at number 10, particularly the issue of foreshadowing, because with foreshadowing, there are hints in the writing that can lead you to make a prediction about what you think is going to happen next. And when we make these predictions while we're reading, it allows us to become more involved in the story. If we make a prediction about what we think will happen and it comes true, then we feel satisfied that we know what's going on. And if we make a prediction and it doesn't come true, something different happens, then we get curious and interested about what will happen next, because the writer is taking us on a different journey than we thought. So as you're reading the next story, Two Kinds, be aware, are there any moments where you read a line and you think, oh, I know what's going to happen next? If so, circle that and put a note in the margin about what you believe will happen next, because that is an element that's called foreshadowing. We'll talk about irony later in the semester and symbolism, and so at this point I really only want you to consider foreshadowing for number 10 when you do your activities related to the next story. Okay, we're almost finished here. Page 16 and 17 have some follow-up questions, and if you look, the first 5 have been answered for you, but 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 have not. So I would like for you to answer these questions. And same thing on the bottom of 17, the 5 significant quotations. The first one has been answered for you, but 2, 3, 4, and 5 have not. So if you have not done these already, I would like for you to do these 2 activities, and then when you have completed them, take a look at the answers on page 21. But don't look at the answers until you've completed them, because this is a good practice. Now, I'm not going to grade your responses to write figs, but I will be collecting and marking your responses to the journal questions on the next reading, which is called Two Kinds. So take time to do this for practice, and then follow the instructions on Blackboard in order to complete your activities for the short story Two Kinds by Amy Tan.